people around you, it's easy to see how unique each individual is. Every person possesses traits that make them different from everyone else. There are, however, similarities amongst certain individuals, especially members of the same family. You might look a lot like your mom, or maybe you're an exact replica of your dad. Maybe you're a perfect blend of the two of them, or perhaps you even have some traits from your grandparents. While some physical traits have environmental components, like having tanner skin after an afternoon in the sun, most physical traits are genetic, that is, coded for in your DNA. These genetic traits get passed on from generation to generation. This is why you bear a resemblance to your parents and grandparents, siblings, aunts, uncles, or cousins. Most traits are coded as genes or segments of DNA on a chromosome. There are thousands of genes located on the chromosomes inside the nuclei of cells. During sexual reproduction, cells in specialized sex organs, like ovaries and testes, undergo a type of cell division called meiosis. Meiosis takes a diploid cell that has two sets of chromosomes, and after two divisions, generates 4 haploid cells known as gametes. Gametes, like egg and sperm, have half the number of chromosomes of a normal cell, or 1 set of chromosomes. This is important so that when egg and sperm fuse during fertilization, the resulting zygote has 2 sets of chromosomes and is diploid. Because of these alternating processes of meiosis, which halves the chromosome number, and fertilization, which restores the chromosome number, a species is able to maintain its proper chromosome number from generation to generation. In order for you to exist, your mother had to package half her chromosomes into an egg, while your father packaged half his chromosomes into a sperm. When the sperm and egg fused during fertilization, you were conceived. You began as a single cell, a zygote, who grew into an embryo, then into a fetus, who was eventually born and grew into the beautifully unique person you are today. So you see, regardless of which family member you look most like, exactly half of your genetic material came from your mother, and half came from your father. As a matter of fact, every single sexually reproducing organism on the planet, from a tiny fruit fly to a human being, received exactly half their DNA from their mother and half from their father. So why is it that some people look more like one parent than the other, or they can possess traits that neither parent has themselves? The answer lies in genetics, the study of heredity, or how information is passed from one generation to the next. The study of genetics began with a man named Gregor Mendel, who lived from 1822 to 1884. Hey-o! Gregor Mendel was not a scientist in the traditional sense of the word, but rather a monk in the Catholic Church. He lived in a monastery in what is now the Czech Republic and taught high school science. He conducted experiments on pea plants, tracking the inheritance patterns for traits like plant height, seed color, seed shape, flower color, etc. His experiments involved first identifying true breeding plants that always produced offspring like themselves. For example, a true breeding plant that had purple flowers would always produce offspring that had purple flowers. These true breeding plants may also be referred to as pure-bred or homozygous individuals. After identifying the true breeding plants, Mendel would cross-pollinate them with other true breeding plants. For example, he would cross-pollinate a pure-bred purple-flowered plant with a pure-bred white-flowered plant. This first-generation cross are called the parent generation, or P1 for short. The offspring of the P1 generation, called the F1 generation for short, produced all purple flowers. Since the F1 generation is a cross between two different purebred plants, they are called hybrid or heterozygous individuals. Mendel wondered what would happen if he crossed two hybrid plants, so he created a second generation of offspring called the F2 generation. What he observed was quite unexpected. Most of the offspring had purple flowers, but some of them had white flowers. The white-flowered trait had reappeared in the F2 generation, but how? Gregor Mendel realized that each individual possessed two factors for a trait, one from their mother and one from their father. He figured out that some traits are dominant, able to cover up other traits, while some traits are recessive and can be hidden. In the case of the flowers, the purple-flowered trait was dominant over the recessive white-flowered trait. All the hybrid plants in the F1 generation had purple flowers, but they carried a hidden trait for the white flowers from their white-flowered parent. When two hybrid purple flowers were crossed, sometimes the two recessive white-flowered genes combined in the offspring to make the white-flowered trait reappear in the F2 generation. This idea that one trait could hide another trait is called Mendel's principle of dominance. It is a very important principle that geneticists today still use. The principle of dominance isn't the only contribution Gregor Mendel made to genetics. He also discovered two fundamental laws that form the basis of the field of genetics. The first law is Mendels Law of segregation. Mendels Law of segregation states that two factors for a trait separate during the formation of gametes. Let me explain. Every individual has two genes or factors for a trait, one from their mother and one from their father. When an individual makes gametes, egg or sperm, by meiosis, the genes separate. Therefore, each gamete possesses only one gene for each trait. Segregation is another word for separation. That's why it's called the law of segregation. It's important that the gametes have only one gene, so that when they fuse with another gamete during fertilization, the new individual will have exactly two genes for the trait, one from their mother and one from their father. It's pretty impressive that Gregor Mendel had the insight to develop this law, considering at the time no one knew anything about meiosis or DNA. The term gene wasn't even used yet. Mendel called these mysterious agents of heredity factors. The second law that Mendel wrote is the law of independent assortment. Mendel's law of independent assortment states that when gametes are being formed, the factors for one trait are sorted out independently of other traits. So for example, if we're talking pea plants, the height of the plant doesn't affect the color of the flowers. These two traits are inherited independently of each other. If you're a human, which you are, independent assortment means your eye color doesn't affect the texture of your hair, for instance. You could have blue eyes and curly hair, blue eyes and straight hair, brown eyes and curly hair, or brown eyes and straight hair. These two traits are inherited independently of each other, and the inheritance patterns of one don't affect the inheritance patterns of another. Just like the law of segregation, independent assortment is also explained by the movements of chromosomes during meiosis. Again, it's quite remarkable that Gregor Mendel could pick up on these patterns without the knowledge of meiosis or DNA structure. He was truly a man ahead of his time, whose work continues to influence modern science.